everyone, and welcome to Level Up Guitar, where you come to level up your playing. I'm Kalen, and today we're talking about notes on the fretboard. A lot of beginner students ask me the question, should I try to memorize all the notes on the fretboard? And they're always surprised when I tell them, absolutely not. I'm not sure why so many teachers try to get their students to do this when they're still beginners. Maybe it's because they don't remember being a beginner themselves. Maybe they forgot when in their development they actually worked on this and when it became useful to them. Or maybe it's just a logical fallacy, thinking that if you know the notes, you'll be able to play the right ones at the right times in a real-life situation. What is useful to beginners and intermediate players is knowing a small handful of notes, which I'm going to show you today. And I'll also explain why these notes are the ones that will help you to learn the others in a more natural process as you progress on the instrument. There is a point in time where you start to benefit from knowing the names of all the notes on the fretboard, but this will happen more organically as you work on applying basic music theory concepts to the instrument, and when you learn it this way, you'll remember it much better than just trying to straight up memorize the whole fretboard without any context. So which notes should you learn, and what's the best way to learn them? Let's get into it. Step 1 is going to focus on only the E and A strings, and I'll explain why in just a minute. We're actually going to start by looking at what notes we already know, and I'm assuming here that you know your open chords, but if you don't, you'll be able to follow along just fine, so don't worry. If you know your open chords, you might also know that the lowest note on each one of them is the root of that chord. So it turns out we already know that this is an E, this is an F, this is a G, and on the A string we know that this is an A, this is a B, if you know your B7 chord, and this is a C. As long as we've landed here on C, let's quickly take a look at a C major scale, because that's going to tell us how far we need to move to find the next natural note on the fretboard. So the interval construction tells us that we're moving a whole step to get to D from C. So we're on the 5th fret with D, another whole step to get to E, a half step to F, a whole step to G, and you should know that the 12th fret is the same as the open string, so you already know that that's an A. Now let's take a second to count how many notes on this string we actually need to memorize. By the way, if you ever learned how to tune your guitar by ear, you would know that the 5th fret on the A string is going to be the same as the open string above it. So that's D. If you didn't know that before, you know it now, and we can cross that off the list of notes we need to memorize. So that just leaves E, F, and G. At this point, you might be wondering about the in-between notes, the sharps and flats, and I encourage students to work on getting more comfortable with these only after they're 1000% confident with the natural notes. The fact is, if you know the natural notes, it's fairly easy and quick to locate one that is a half step up or down when there's a sharp or a flat sign in front of it. But I'll reiterate, make sure you know the natural notes. Make some flashcards, or if you have a flashcard app that you like, so that you can quiz yourself on where these notes are until your response time is immediate. At that point is when you should add the sharps and the flats into the mix. So we've covered the A string. If we look at the E string, we can use the same process, starting from that G that we knew from the open chord. Locating it in the major scale to see how far we need to go to find the next note, A, which you can see is a whole step up on the 5th fret. Another whole step brings us to B at the 7th fret. Half step up gives us C, whole step up from there, D, and finally we're back to E here on 12, which we know is E because 12 is always the same as the open string. Following the same steps from before, let's look at how many notes we actually need to memorize. If you know how to tune your guitar, you'll already know that A is at the 5th fret. So that just leaves us with B, C, and D. So that's a total of 6 notes you need to memorize, 3 on the A string and 3 on the E string. So how do we go from there to learning the rest of the strings in a way that is more natural and context-based rather than pure memorization? And the answer is octave shapes, which look like this. So if you want D on the G string, all you need to do is find it on the A string, jump your octave, and there it is. Conversely, if you're playing a note here on fret 7 on the G string, and you don't know what it is, you just look down the octave to your A string, and there you have it. And rather than just memorizing your octave as a new shape, I want to encourage you to look at your octaves as a part of your bar chord shapes, or even as part of a power chord. A power chord, if you didn't know, contains your root, a fifth above that, and the next root above that fifth. So we now have a context for that octave shape, rather than just memorizing it as something arbitrary. Just a quick reminder here that you can find a link to my Patreon in the description below, where you can support with as little as $3 a month. It really helps me to be able to keep making these videos. So this is great. We're almost done here, and we've only had to memorize the location of 6 notes on the fretboard. But what about the B string? We could use this octave shape between the D and B strings, which, by the way, is different than the other 2 octave shapes we looked at, and is a shape you should definitely be familiar with. However, that creates a situation where you have to jump 2 sets of octaves if you don't know your D string by heart yet. So I don't suggest this method. Instead, I encourage students to do this string in a similar way to how we did the E and A string. You don't have the bass note of an open chord to go off of for these first few notes, but if you know a little about your open chords, you recognize that this is a C on the 1st fret, this is a D on the 3rd, and finally we can use that tuning trick from before to recognize E on the 5th fret. Now you just have to remember that this is an F, this is G, and this is A. And we're back to 12, which we know is B, the same as the open string. Another option would be to use this other octave shape that skips 2 strings from the A string. This is a good method for some people if memorizing the notes on too many strings at once is overwhelming. Everybody's brain is different, and I actually encourage you to use both methods to see what works better for you. I will say that I find for most people, they end up using the octave shapes to get the ball rolling and build up some familiarity. Then use the flashcards method to identify blind spots and memorize those remaining notes. That leaves us with step 3, applied theory, which basically just means try to look at your notes in relation to the basic theory you're learning. Let's say somebody asks you to find the note E on the G string. Well, here's our C triad shape. And if you know your basic theory, you know that this is spelled C, E, and G. So that E we're looking for is right here. This might seem more complicated than just referencing the octave. And at first, maybe it is, but eventually, thinking about these connections between the notes in our basic triad shapes will help us to better see the entire fretboard and the locations of all the notes on it. By the way, if you like triads and want to learn more about them, be sure to check out my lesson on triads, inversions, and voice leading from a couple of weeks ago. Alright, that's it for today. Once again, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description, and if you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment. And I hope you like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, and secrets from Level Up Guitar.